Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are on to Week 16, about to wrap up the fantasy playoffs. How you feeling?
Well, everything went my way last week, as you know. All of the differing picks that we had on game predictions went my way, and I had a very good week against Blake in the semifinals, and I advanced to the finals. I'm still sad that it couldn't be us in the finals for sure, but hopefully I can win it for the both of us. But yeah, as I've alluded to, Blake, 132 correct on the season for game predictions. I have 139 correct, but who knows? If you do that same sort of swing, you still have 2 weeks. It's not possible.
Yeah, and speaking of, the one thing that did go my way this past weekend was I got engaged. So
yes, that is outside of football. That is very good news.
Yeah. So shout out to that, and
yeah, I think you're probably all right.
Jump.
All
things considered. I'll take the loss in fantasy.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about Thursday night matchup here. We've got Jaguars at the Jets. You wrote the notes, so take it away.
Yeah, so if the Jaguars, 1.5 point underdog, so it's a close one, but kind of surprised, but I guess the records are probably similar, but the Jaguars are kind of hot right now with their offense. They had an overtime win against the Cowboys in Week 15, which I predicted, LOL. Trevor Lawrence has had 13 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception in his past 5 games, while also averaging 289 passing yards. That's very good. So I'll ask you, has Lawrence entered the must-start category of QBs?
I think probably yes. I'm going to pull up what he's been doing lately. I mean,
it's a lot.
Top 5 in 3 of his last 4. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think it's. I mean, obviously it's a tough matchup with the Jets, but I think that they've kind of found their offense under Trevor Lawrence, and so I think that's gonna continue.
Yeah, it's interesting how this offense, like the first 3 games. I remember a few weeks ago we did an analysis of like the first 3 versus the next 3 games for the opening of the season for the Jaguars, and it seems like they are back in their groove and even better than the start of the season as a passing offense. I'll talk about Travis Etienne because he improved a little bit later on, but let me first talk about the pass catchers. But Zay Jones was the wide receiver 1 in Week 15, catching 3 of Lawrence's 4 passing touchdowns on 6 receptions, so that's great efficiency. But I'll ask you, and you kind of already alluded to this with the matchup, are you worried about starting Zay Jones this week, considering the Jets' defense ranks 4th in passing yards per game at only 193.9?
Yeah, it's a little concerning. I mean, I already did mention the matchup is tougher, but I think Zay Jones has worked his way. He's earned his way into your starting lineup with the way he's been performing over the past month.
Yeah.
And I think he's a very strong flex option.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
at the very least.
He's had decent games without receiving touchdowns, so the fact that he can do both is what makes you feel better. And, meanwhile, Christian Kirk had a solid day with 6 receptions for 92 yards on 10 targets. So not a boom, but that is a very good, reliable stat line. And Evan Ingram had a similar day with 8 receptions for 62 yards on 10 targets. So Kirk, Jones, and Ingram are getting fed by Lawrence, and so I think that you would agree you can probably start all these players, all 3 of them, including Lawrence.
Yeah, I would say, and I would say in general, lower expectations based on that matchup,
Sure.
But I think that you're going to have pretty good options elsewhere to turn away from any of those guys.
I agree. It's hard to go off of the hot hands, especially in the fantasy playoffs. The good news for Travis Etienne is that he had his most carries and rushing yards since Week 9 with 19 carries, which allowed him to have 103 rushing yards. But he only had 2 receptions, which limits his ceiling without touchdowns, but still a step in the right direction. He did leave the game in the 4th quarter due to an ankle injury, but he did ultimately retake the field in overtime. So monitor that, but he should be good. This is kind of the news I'm reading right now. So yeah, you're still starting him as well. So if the Jets, Zach Wilson, I think officially will be the starter for Thursday Night Football. That's great.
Yeah.
He had his best game all season in Week 15, but that only means 18 pass completions for 317 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns and 1 interception. It's a good yardage total, but still not a lot of completions. Garrett Wilson had 4 receptions for 98 yards on 9 targets. So this is a fine day for Garrett Wilson, but as we've said many times, his ceiling is sadly limited with Zach Wilson at QB, but I think he still makes your flex for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and then CJ Uzama, remember him on the Bengals? He had 2 receptions and that was basically both of Zach Wilson's passing touchdowns. But I would say we do not care because most of the season it's been Conklin. But with Zach Wilson at quarterback, I'm not looking to start any pass catcher other than Garrett Wilson. And then with the backfield, Zonovan Knight, this is kind of disappointing because we were hoping that for people that had him, he could just be plugged in for the rest of the season, but he was the only Jets running back to record a rushing attempt in the first half, so that seems good, but then proceeded to split carries with Michael Carter as the Jets struggled to rush the ball against the Lions. Knight averaged 1.77 yards per carry this game, and Carter didn't do much better, but he did do better at 3.75 yards per carry. I mean, I guess that is much better, but I mean, that's still not great.
Right.
And Knight out-touched Carter 13-5, but this was not the performance you were looking for if you were considering starting Knight the rest of the way. I don't know exactly. I don't think the Jaguars' defense is anything too scary, but this does make you a little less confident in just plugging in Knight and thinking that he can just have a high floor for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the team in general looks worse under Zach Wilson. We'll continue to say that as long as it's true. But yeah, Zonovan Knight, I think, has slightly less upside than he did with Mike White under center. It's just kind of the nature of the beast here with the New York Jets.
I mean, I've seen some talk about this, and I'm curious to know what you think about this. Do you think that it's a little fluky how quick Knight started to just do so well once he got the start, because he had kind of been being rested all season, so he's playing more tired players on defense, or do you think that's unfair?
No, that's a bad take. Whoever said that, it's kind of a goofball.
Well, I don't think there's absolutely nothing to it, but I wouldn't say it's definitely explanatory.
No, that's silly. I completely disregard that comment.
Wow, all right, I'll pick the Jaguars.
Yeah, I am too.
God, I didn't think that was like absolutely abysmal, but we'll move on to Saturday, which most of the games will be on.
That's a dumb take.
Okay, we'll move on. Falcons at Ravens. Desmond Ridder was held to just 13 pass completions for 97 yards in his NFL debut. So that's not great, but 38 rushing yards and 6 carries, that's pretty good. It shows you what maybe he could do, his versatility as a quarterback. This is a fun fact. Drake London was the only Falcons wide receiver to register a reception, but he had 7 for 70 yards. So is that a high enough floor to make him a flex player for you?
Well, I mean, that's 14 points in
It
PPR
is.
scoring. That's not bad.
But that's more than half of Ritter's completions in a game.
No, I know that. And I think that, honestly, it's not all that surprising. I played Drake London in DFS last week, and he did all right, obviously, especially given his salary. But I think that has a lot to do with, with no Kyle Pitts on the field, the next best man is Drake London. Yeah. And as a rookie quarterback, he's going to be targeting the most talented player on the field most often. So, if you have if you've kept Drake London and you made the playoffs with him on your roster, this might be a good opportunity, especially with the Ravens secondary not really performing all that well season long. That might be a good spot to play him again this week.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's a good stat line for sure. Tyler Algier had 17 carries for 139 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown on 49% of snaps. So that's good. While Cordell Patterson had 14 carries for 52 yards and a rushing touchdown as well on 50% of snaps. Are both of these players on your flex radar? Obviously, the rushing totals for Algier are even more impressive, but I think Patterson has that more likelihood of getting more receptions just because of the player we know he can be.
Well, the player we know he can be has not been the player he has been this season.
Not quite.
So I really wouldn't bank on too many receptions for Patterson moving forward. It's a coaching problem. It's a skill issue, TBH. I do like Algier
benching
slightly
Patterson,
more than Patterson.
Flexing Algier. Is that kind of the feel?
Yeah, I think that's fine if you have to. I really would prefer to not start either of them if I could, just because I think it's kind of risky. But Algier's been playing pretty well as of late, and well, as I say that, he was actually pretty bad leading up to his bye. So I don't know. You feel more confident about both these guys than I do.
I feel much better about Algier, but I would like to see him get receptions, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen in this offense. But, I mean, 139 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown and 17 carries, that's really good. I mean, that's a high floor running back that could likely be on a lot of waivers. So, I don't know what his waiver percentage is, but I know he's not 100.
I'll tell you right here.
I know he's not 100. Yeah, check that real quick.
68.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not impossible.
In a third of leagues.
Yeah. So, consider it, but, it's hard. It's hard to put a running back in flex unless you have just incredible depth. So, there you go. Move on to the Ravens. monitor Lamar Jackson's injury status, as the Ravens are hopeful that he can return this week. Seems likely, is the sense I'm getting. And over the past 2 games, since J.K. Dobbins has returned from injury, he has had 28 carries for 245 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown, but only 1 reception. So we know that he has a very high floor if he gets the carries, and it is worth noting that both of these games that he's been back has been with Tyler Huntley under center and not Lamar Jackson taking carries away from him. Huntley can be that person,
Right.
but he hasn't really shown it this season. So is Dobbins' floor still high enough for you to be comfortable to start him? It's basically, even with Lamar Jackson being there.
Yeah, his floor is fine. And just kind of checking on Huntley, he's gotten between 6 and 10 carries of his own in the games he's played. So not bad by any means.
Yeah.
I think Dobbins is kind of a high floor, kind of capped ceiling, especially if he doesn't get that rushing touchdown.
He needs a touchdown.
He kind of feels like a low risk, low reward kind of player, which is weird, but
I
don't think that's yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just when we get to the Browns, Nick Chubb's kind of had a stretch of games where he's had like close to 90 or 100 rushing yards, but that's it.
Right.
So then it just ends up being like, all right, well, he had a good NFL day, but it's not really showing on my fantasy team. And I feel like Dobbins can fall into that sometimes too.
I would agree with that.
Gus Edwards also had an extremely efficient day with 7 carries for 55 yards, but he only played in 70% of the snaps. And as we've said many times, not looking to start too many people in this backfield because Lamar can kind of take it all on himself. For pass catchers, Demarcus Robinson has had at least 5 receptions in his past 3 games, 2 of those with Huntley, of course. But I think Mark Andrews is the only reliable, you would think, beneficiary for Lamar Jackson's potential return. He's been struggling recently, but you got to just trust that Jackson coming back will be good for him.
Yeah, and this is being recorded on Wednesday, and as of now, Lamar Jackson has yet to practice, so I don't know, maybe pump your brakes on that, but I mean, in general, we know who the pass catchers are on this team that need to be started, and really Mark Andrews is not he's not really qualifying as one of those players, although you kind of have to play him just because of you really don't have any better options with as high of a ceiling as him.
Yeah. All right, I'll take the Ravens at home, although I think the spread is very generous to them, honestly.
Yeah, I'm gonna join you. And
7.5
obviously,
favorite.
Yeah.
All right. Well, move on to Lions at Panthers. DeAndre Swift still only had 8 carries on 40% of snaps, but he had 5 receptions for 23 receiving yards on 9 targets. Swift has only had double-digit carries in 2 games this season. I was surprised. I guess not really, but it is surprising. And those were his 2 best fantasy performances this season. So kind of the opposite situation. Yeah, with J.K. Dobbins as far as the high receiving floor. But do you think that floor is too high not to start Swift? Because, 5 receptions gets you very close to double digits already. You just need some yards on top of that.
Yeah, Swift has been a very interesting player to manage, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah, that's another word for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's kind of been a fringe RB2 / flex, so you're not leaving a ton of points on the bench if you do decide to bench him.
Yeah.
I mean, his season highs are 21 and 26.5, and everything else is 14 or lower, pretty much. Yeah. So it really depends on who you have at this point, but DeAndre Swift is just not getting enough usage in this backfield. That's how I feel.
It's strange. It's strange. I don't see Jamal Williams really leaving the team. I don't know his contract situation, but it's so the downfall of Swift. I mean, this is someone who's arguably end of first round, beginning of second round of drafts this year. So definitely a disappointing pick if you picked him. Someone who's not been a disappointing pick is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who continues to be very consistent. So yeah, very good if you had him. Curious to see where he'll go in drafts next season. I'm sure pretty high. So with the Panthers, Deontay Foreman had 10 carries for 9 yards, ouch, on 30% of snaps, while Chuba Hubbard had 4 carries for 10 yards, yippee, and 3 receptions for 57 yards. So Surprisingly, this Detroit defense used to look horrible, but recently they've kind of been tough on the run. So I wouldn't really be looking to start either Foreman or Hubbard. How do you feel about that?
No, yeah, not if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
These are kind of low upside. I mean, it's a low upside offense in general. So, like you mentioned before, Detroit has given up points earlier in the season and not so much lately. They've tightened up, and so I think that both of these options, if you can avoid it, should be on your bench.
Yeah, didn't they start the season like 1-6, and now they're like 7-7? It's like the Dolphins last season.
Yeah, maybe so.
We'll see if they can make it in the playoffs. I don't know. So with DJ Moore, after having 0 receptions in Week 14, he had 5 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets in Week 15. Moore hasn't had more than 6 targets since Week 8. How do you value him?
He's a boomer bust flex.
Yeah, that's really all you can say.
On the weeks that, I mean, you pretty much have to either put him in your lineup and hope, or put him on your bench and hope he doesn't go off.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he is.
Yeah. Another player that has not been fun to roster, I'm sure. It seems like we're both picking the Lions in this one their way, but they are the favorites on the spread. And we'll move on to Bills at Bears. You're already going to pick the Bills? Wow. I don't blame you.
Yeah, I know. Bold choice.
I'm with you. Last Saturday, Josh Allen. It was Saturday, right? That they played? Oh.
Yep. Yeah. Saturday night.
Josh Allen threw for 304 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns while also having 77 rushing yards on 10 carries. Wow. He is legit. Surprisingly, a Bills wide receiver did not catch a touchdown, and Stephon Diggs only had 5 receptions while Gabe Davis had 4 receptions. Gabe Davis has had 4 straight single-digit fantasy scores. I've never been high on him, really, so it's still disappointing. Cole Beasley, coming out of retirement and even playing minimally in Week 15, makes me think that Isaiah McKenzie has way too low of a floor. Beasley only had like 1 reception, but the fact that they did that, I think, makes me lose all confidence in McKenzie being reliable. And
yeah, we talked about that when the news broke.
But he
kind of falls out of relevance.
Yeah, and he did play a little bit, so there you go. Some positives from this offense is that Dawson Knox has had back-to-back games with a receiving touchdown, and he also had 6 receptions for 98 yards in Week 15 on top of that touchdown. So is Knox an enticing tight end play in fantasy playoffs? I guess he has to be, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
He's kind of reemerged. It's been surprising how little he was used earlier this season, I would say, because he had a decent season last season. But you're starting to see the value that he can have in this passing offense for sure. All right, and then the backfield. We love this backfield. Devin Singletary played 60% of snaps and had 13 carries for 42 yards and 3 receptions for 28 yards, while James Cook played in 36% of snaps and had 5 carries for 34 yards and 2 receptions for 5 yards and a touchdown. Basically, I would not look to start either. It looked like Cook was trending in the right direction of potentially overtaking this backfield, but that is not the case on the snap count this week, but he's the one that got the touchdown. So it's just like, I don't know if you can really trust.
No, it's really hard to predict this backfield, and ultimately this is a team that has 11 wins, 3 losses. They're playing to win games and secure their spot in the playoffs and, potentially be a number 1 seed in the AFC. So I think it comes down to they're going to use both guys, but I wouldn't really give either of them a clear edge, especially in fantasy lineups.
Yeah, so I guess it's Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox, and I think that's it. I'm not looking to start Gabe Davis personally.
Gabe Davis if you need a home run.
Yeah, I guess so. That is fair. He can do that every once in a while. All right, so with the Bears, I'll say Justin Fields proved me wrong a little bit. I wasn't a complete hater, but I was saying he maybe wasn't a top 10 quarterback on the week, but he was. I think he was QB7. And it was because of that tough matchup against the Eagles, but Fields had 15 carries for 95 yards while also adding 2 passing touchdowns to his otherwise unimpressive passing stats. Him getting those few touchdown passes, though, helps elevate that rushing floor to be something that creates a good QB performance. And 14 pass completions, 152 passing yards, makes any Bears pass catcher extremely touchdown dependent, as we know. Another play that did very well was David Montgomery. He had a strong fantasy day thanks to 1 rushing touchdown and 1 receiving touchdown on top of 12 carries for 53 yards and 3 receptions for 38 yards. So not an amazing day without the touchdowns, but the touchdowns really helped him have a good day. I think those are the only two players you're looking to start on this team, and we both already picked the Bills. You got anything else to add in this matchup?
No, not really. I was looking to see how Cole Kmet did. He got 6.5 fantasy points, so you probably have better options despite him being the tight end 12 on the season.
Yeah. Tight end 12. Oh, it's so funny. All right. Saints at Browns. So two pretty fluky stat lines from Jawan Johnson and Rashid Shaheed led the team in fantasy points for the Saints. Reminder that Andy Dalton is still the starting quarterback, and he only threw for 151 passing yards on 11 pass completions. But he did have 2 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and Taysom Hill also had 1 passing touchdown, for those of you keeping count. Chris Olave, and this probably goes close to home for Blake, because he traded for him recently, but he had an underwhelming day with only 3 receptions for 53 yards. Not horrible. He is still very consistent, but below his par, I would say. But that Andy Dalton stat line makes it extremely difficult for Olave to continue his consistency. I mean, I don't want to keep on beating the dead horse, but Andy Dalton cannot win games for this team. Don't know why he's still there, and it hurts. It hurts the team and the offense. I don't understand it. Whatever.
Yeah. No, we've talked about it all year, that it's been a very confusing narrative that Jameis Winston hasn't been starting or even like really competing for the job, it seems.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's bizarre. I really got nothing else to add with that.
All right. David Johnson, the one you know and love, served as the RB2 behind Kamara in Week 15 since Mark Ingram was placed in IR, so basically took the Mark Ingram role. But this is kind of a surprising stat line for Kamara. He had 21 carries for 91 yards, but only 2 receptions for 13 yards. I guess you could hope that he can have an even better rushing day against a weak Browns rushing defense if his receiving numbers don't return to his standard, because usually he is that PPR beast, but now he's getting 21 carries. But you still love the touches. It's a step in the right direction. He just needs to find the end zone, I guess, if he's going to be this rushing back that we're not used to him being really exclusively. So I guess Kamara and Olave, that's really all I would do. And with the Browns, there was only 1 touchdown in the Browns' 13-3 win over the Ravens in Week 15. Deshaun Watson had 18 pass completions for 161 yards and a touchdown, while also adding 22 rushing yards on 6 carries. I would say Watson is still a QB2, but it's hard to tell if he'll be able to come close to some of his best performances in previous seasons before this season ends. So not playing bad, but not playing anywhere close to his ceiling. So
Yeah, I would say keep him on your bench if you can avoid it.
Yeah, like if it was between Tyler Huntley and Watson, I'd probably go Watson again. But if Lamar's back, of course, I'm going to Lamar. So that's one example. Donovan Peoples-Jones was the only other Browns player to have double-digit fantasy points. DPJ had 4 receptions for 31 yards and the 1 sole touchdown. Amari Cooper also had 4 receptions, and David Njoku had 3 receptions, but neither found the end zone. It's kind of troubling. You would have hoped that Cooper would be the one, if you have Cooper probably, but he'd be the one that you would expect to be doing the best in this offense, but Watson just isn't getting enough pass completions. I know he had more in Week 14, but I don't know what you do if you roster DPJ, Cooper, or Njoku, honestly.
So, well, okay, I mentioned this last week. I said Peoples-Jones has been doing way better than Amari Cooper.
Yes.
I think you can start DPJ and you need to bench Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and then Njoku, it's tight end's a whole different discussion, so I guess. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, DPJ is looking better than Cooper, so you have to erase the names and look at the stats, and DPJ is the better pass catcher to have in this offense since Watson's been there, so that is fair. And as previously mentioned, Nick Chubb has had 3 straight games without a touchdown, and consequently 3 straight single-digit fantasy scores. He's had about 90 rushing yards in each one, so yeah. Pretty much already answered players we would start here.
I feel like positive regression has to be coming for Nick Chubb. He's just too talented to not find the end zone in 4 straight games, I feel.
I agree. I'm going to agree with you and pick the Browns. I think a Deshaun Watson versus Andy Dalton. I think I have to take Deshaun even with the current form of Deshaun Watson. We'll move on to a big spread between the Seahawks at the Chiefs. Chiefs are a 10-point favorite. Kenneth Walker made his return from injury against the 49ers in Week 15 Thursday Night Football and played in 75% of snaps. Walker should be safely back to his pre-injury value and likely won't face a tougher defense than that 49ers defense for the rest of the season. Tyler Lockett suffered a finger injury, and his earliest expected return is week 17, so almost certainly out for this week. Metcalf and Lockett have both played in every game this season, so it's difficult to tell how things could change. But what do you think this means for Marquise Goodwin, who has been touchdown dependent, but he is kind of slotting himself into that wide receiver 2 role, you would think?
Yeah, no, I would think that if you needed someone that isn't exactly rostered in a bunch of leagues, I mean, 11% for Marquise Goodwin is definitely low. So if you need that option, I think, as long as Lockett is officially ruled out, I think that's a kind of a boom bust kind of play.
Yeah, from the reports I'm reading, which who knows because it's Pete Carroll that's the coach of this team, but it seems like they're hopeful that Lockett could be there in week 17. So I'm reading that he's still almost certain to be out this week. But yeah, wait for that.
Yeah,
because it does heavily impact Goodwin's value. The Chiefs. How about the Texans? Taking the Chiefs to OT in what was the biggest spread of the season or the second biggest spread, something like that.
Yeah.
So that was surprising. Jerick McKinnon. Something that's equally surprising is Jerick McKinnon putting up the RB1 performance in back-to-back games, mainly due to his receiving work. In Week 15, McKinnon had 10 carries for 52 yards and 1 touchdown, while also having 8 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. So is McKinnon a must-start after having 15 receptions across his past 2 games?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this is... He's
These
always...
are softballs you're giving me.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. I'm just trying to, I'm buttering you up right now. Meanwhile, Isaiah Pacheco only played in 35% of snaps, but had 15 carries for 86 rushing yards, but only 1 reception. So does Pacheco have a high enough floor to make your starting lineup? That's maybe a more difficult question.
Yeah, Pacheco, playing in that few amount of snaps, and I guess the only expectation here is that they're, because of that 10-point spread, you're going to be thinking they're going to be playing from up,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe there's more goal line work for Pacheco. But I think honestly that it's McKinnon's backfield, and Pacheco's kind of the the secondary piece in that offense. So
I agree.
At least in the rushing attack, I would say that he's kind of I think he's a risky flex, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty heavily touchdown dependent, whereas McKinnon has that PPR floor that is looking unmatched in the past 2 weeks. I'll pick the Chiefs in this one. Oh, and Juju Smith-Schuster and Travis Kelce both had 10 receptions, so that's great, of course, if you have them. So there you go. All right, move on to Giants at Vikings. So if the Giants, this is like borderline Titans analysis. Saquon Barkley and nobody else. Saquon had 18 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown, while also adding 5 receptions for 33 yards and playing in 86% of snaps. In Week 14, he had like 30-some% of snaps, but he was dealing with an injury. Now he's back to that high snap percentage, kind of an unmatched snap percentage for a running back in the league. So yeah, he's a workhorse back for sure. And Daniel Jones only threw for 160 passing yards and 0 passing touchdowns. So that does not provide a high enough ceiling for any pass catcher. It's Saquon, nobody else. Moving on, right? Vikings.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Greatest regular season NFL comeback of all time. It might just be. I think it is, by the point total, the biggest regular season or just NFL game comeback ever. They were down 33-0 at half, come back and win an OT 39-36. It was ridiculous. I guess that got Matt Ryan benched, but maybe we'll talk about that later. I saw that today. For the Colts.
I feel bad for him.
Yeah, it is the defense that allowed those 39 points, not Matt Ryan. Anyways,
right.
Kirk Cousins has had back-to-back games with 400-plus passing yards, and he also had 4 passing touchdowns in Week 15. Justin Jefferson boomed like he does, but KJ Osborne actually had an even better fantasy day, which was surprising. Osborne had 10 receptions for 157 yards and a touchdown, while Adam Thielen only had 3 receptions, so I would not be looking to start him. But I'll focus on Osborne. He's had back-to-back games with 1 receiving touchdown, but his previous season high in receptions was 5. So, news or noise for Osborne?
Yeah, honestly, I think this is more noise than anything.
Yeah. I think it could be news for next season.
Player.
Sorry, just want to add that.
Well, maybe. But Osborne's a player that I talked about at the very beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Kind of being like a Joshua Palmer type character.
Sure.
And Adam Thielen... Yeah, he didn't have a great game, but Adam Thielen has been playing pretty solid prior to this week. So, honestly, I wouldn't be too afraid of starting Thielen if you have to. And I would still start Thielen ahead of Osborne this week if I were given the choice.
He does have a higher floor than a lot of players that are in the same kind of fringe category, so that is fair.
Yeah.
TJ Hawkinson only had 3 receptions, but again, you can't bench him as a tight end in this high-volume offense. And then Dalvin Cook woke up with the rest of this offense after the first half. He had 190 all-purpose yards, so you love to see that if you have them. I'll pick the Vikings for this one.
Yeah, let me. I'm gonna scroll down because this is around the time where I probably need to start making different picks than you.
We still got 2 weeks. Still got this one and next week.
I know that's not that many.
It's
not.
not.
Are we not gonna go through week 18 because of fantasy?
Who knows? I mean, we wouldn't do a video about it, but we could record it on our own, and it's up to you.
Yeah, let's just do game picks for 18.
Okay.
Just so we can have the whole regular season.
Sure.
But gosh, yeah, with Vikings being at home, I'm gonna go with you.
Okay. We'll move on to Bengals at Patriots. So Bengals, Joe Burrow only threw for 200 passing yards, but he threw 4 passing touchdowns. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd each caught 1 touchdown, so that's great for them. Joe Mixon struggled, having 11 carries for only 21 yards, but his 5 receptions helped him eclipse double-digit fantasy points. It was a tough matchup in Week 15 against a fairly tough Buccaneers defense, but this week against the Patriots shouldn't be any easier. But, I mean, you're starting Burrow, starting Chase, starting Higgins. Boyd's probably fringe, but meh, and you're starting Mixon.
Boyd is fringe. Boyd is fringe, and Mixon is a starter.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that analysis. The reason Joe Burrow's passing yards were so low is because of all the turnovers that were taking place in the Buccaneers' own territory. So Tom Brady had a very uncharacteristic 4 turnovers in that game,
Yeah.
two interceptions and 2 fumbles.
Yeah, that is unlike him for sure. So if the Patriots, I have some allotted time if you want it for talking about that last play, but if you don't care to do that, if you saw it, you know exactly what I'm referring to with the Patriots.
the most brain dead play in NFL history, probably.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get too into it, but I think that it's just really, really dumb, and it's unfortunate because, well, for starters, if we're going to rant about anything, to be honest, and I'm getting riled up, but it's because it's the Keelan Cole touchdown. Did you happen to see that his foot was out of bounds?
I heard about the fact that the commentators were even saying it was.
The announcers were saying it. It was clear and obvious on the replay. That play for Jacoby Myers doesn't even happen if that touchdown, and I'm throwing air quotes on that, doesn't get called. So
that's true.
You know what? We got the better of them in the Tuck Rule game. I guess I'll let this one slide. Because that's ridiculous.
I don't think that's the same level, but yes.
It's not. But that's just it's just bad ofofficiating.
No,
so
it is.
Whatever.
It is. All right. Some positivity is Ramondre Stevenson having 19 carries for 172 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Also adding a healthy 2 receptions for negative 4 yards.
Excuse me.
You're good. Ramondre Stevenson, great day. But you're not starting really any other player. Myers did not have a good game outside of even that last play. I think he had like 2 receptions. So it's Stevenson and no
Myers
else.
is unstartable. He has been for a month straight wide receiver 45 or worse.
Yeah, I saw he came back from a concussion, so I wonder if that kind of inhibited his judgment on that last play. I hope not.
Joke about that.
I know, but it's sad that it's such an aspect of this sport, but that's a whole different story. We'll move on to your notes, Texans at Titans. Oh, wait. We got to pick. I guess Bengals, but it's...
You guess, yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't think it's possible for your Patriots to beat them?
With the way that they played last week, no.
All right. Fair enough. All right.
Okay, let's move on to one of your favorites of the slate. That's Houston Texans at Tennessee Titans. And I've got some lengthy notes here. With Dameon Pierce placed on IR, Houston has arguably 0 fantasy relevant players.
Yeah.
Any arguments?
I've rostered Nico Collins for a while. I think I dropped him today, and for good reason.
That's fair. Moving on to the Titans. Tennessee isn't far behind in this regard, as Derrick Henry is their only lineup lock. I will say Chig Okonkwo extends his double-digit scoring streak to 3 games, making him a usable starter in deeper leagues.
You go by Chig instead of Chigoziem.
I mean, come on.
Fair enough.
Let's not be so formal. Monitor Traylon Burks' status as he was unable to clear concussion protocol in time to play at the Chargers. He is a boom-bust flex if healthy. Let's quickly pick this game. Where are you going?
I'm going Texans. We talked about this right before we started recording. This is like the only game we talked about on picks. But I just feel like the Texans forced a very close game against the Cowboys and the Chiefs. So I feel like they've hit their stride, you know?
Yeah, they definitely have. It's not resulting in any wins, but I will say this. Derrick Henry owns the Houston Texans and always puts up 200-plus rushing yards on them, so I'm expecting another big game for him.
That is fair.
All right, moving on to, and obviously by that statement, I'm picking the Titans. Yeah. Next up on Saturday afternoon, we've got the Commanders up against the 49ers. It is a bad matchup for these Commander running backs. I would avoid them if possible. I do prefer Brian Robinson over Antonio Gibson based on volume if I have to choose one. And then moving on to the pass catchers, Terry McLaurin is a fringe wide receiver 2. For me, Dotson and Samuel are both boom-bust flex options.
I agree.
Any thoughts on that?
I agree with all the valuations. Did you see the McLaurin penalty that basically revoked a rushing touchdown for the Commanders?
No, I didn't.
So
that was the only game I didn't watch last week.
It was so weird, and I think they must have not ended up scoring on that drive because why else would they show this? But he looks at the official on the sideline. And because it's
did he
just
point at him?
He looked at him, asked presumably if he was in a fine spot. The official gave him a thumbs up and a one-word response, and then McLaurin looked away from him, and then you just see the official already grabbing for his flag, and then immediately throws it out as soon as the play is snapped. So it's really weird.
Wow.
It's some formation flag, but you can tell that they're communicating, and then McLaurin looks away from him, and then he just goes to grab his flag because he knows that.
Yeah, that's
it's
weird.
I mean, I don't know. It seems a little bit more than presumption. Just reading into it, it seems like McLaurin probably was asking him, "Am I good?" He said yes, and then proceeded to immediately throw the flag, and it's weird.
Yeah, that's suspicious. Maybe that guy will get investigated.
Maybe.
Let's talk about the 49ers now. So, as long as Deebo Samuel is unavailable, which is looking like that's going to continue, this is Christian McCaffrey's team. Brandon Ayuk really burned fantasy managers, myself included, last week, as he was out-targeted by both George Kittle and Juwan Jennings. And this is the rationale for why I started him. We saw Ayuk step up as a clear number 1 pass-catching option earlier this season while Deebo was inactive back in Week 8, but that was with Jimmy Garoppolo under center, who we know has good chemistry with Ayuk. If you somehow survived Ayuk's Week 15 flop performance, I'm going to ask you, Carson, should fantasy managers give him another shot this week against the Commanders?
I mean...
It's a tough call.
It is. I think I'd be leaning towards giving him another shot. I think it's very fluky that Juwan Jennings was out-targeted Brandon Ayuk. I think that's very fluky.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think the thing is, though, that we've seen how much Christian McCaffrey and even George Kittle have stepped up since Brock Purdy took over. It does kind of give me a little less hope for Brandon Ayuk in this offense.
I just feel like he at least is still a flex, honestly. But, I mean, yeah, it's not a good time for him to be coming off of a bad game. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not where I want that. I'm agreeing with you
on
the 49ers pick over the Commanders. Although... I mean, I think the 49ers are super legit, but the Commanders have been on a pretty good streak of good performances, even though they've not all resulted in wins, but they're the 7-point underdog.
Yeah. Commanders are the owners of Philadelphia's only loss still.
Yeah.
So that's something to say.
That is true.
All right, let's talk about, speaking of, Philadelphia Eagles at Dallas Cowboys. Now, first off, there is a chance Jalen Hurts with a shoulder injury doesn't play in Week 16. That would be very devastating to fantasy managers out there, assuming you're, unless you're going against them.
Yeah.
But if he is inactive, Gardner Minshew will get the start. Think of him as a slightly better version of Brock Purdy. I don't feel like that's disrespectful, especially from what we've seen from Brock so far. He's a good player.
Yeah.
And Minshew's not bad either. That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Hurts threw for exactly 0 passing touchdowns last week, so it can't be worse from that perspective when considering pass catcher upside on this team. Hurts did, however, vulture 3 touchdowns at the goal line, making Miles Sanders potentially more enticing if Hurts is absent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you think this offense is obviously improved with Hurts being there, but as far as vulturing touchdowns, yeah, I mean, we'll see if this ends up like jinxing people, but I don't see Minshew vulturing 3 touchdowns for Miles Sanders.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst part of it is that, like, Miles Sanders put up 1.9 last week.
Yeah.
So
he's been kind of an
survived
annoying player to roster. I think overall you're probably happy that you have him for where you drafted him. But...
Yeah, I mean, RB12 on the season, I don't know how annoying that is, but...
Well, it's been a lot of boom and it's been a lot of bust, so... But
right.
yeah, RB12, that is very high for where you drafted him, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, either way, last piece of information for the Eagles, Dallas Goedert has been activated off of IR. One more offensive weapon for Minshew/Hurts this week, and I think if you still roster Goddard, he's an automatic starter.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that you would have picked up in Goddard's absence that you would start ahead of him?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean,
like Evan Ingram?
Yeah, Evan Ingram's the first name that comes to mind. I think that if Minshew is the starter, I think you could make a case for Ingram over him. But I think if Hurts is there, it's hard to start Ingram over
so
Goddard.
Remember, the Jags play on Thursday. You're not going to get the luxury of that decision.
I guess that's fair. Then it depends on, I guess, how much of a risk you want to take. Because I think that Ingram is a better play over Goddard if Minshew is the starter.
Okay, I don't necessarily disagree, although I'm looking at, Goddard's stats for the season. He's got 3 games outside of the top 12, actually 3 games outside of the top 10. So he's been really solid this year.
Yeah, he has.
I would think that, maybe the Evan Ingram one is a question mark, but you're probably starting Goddard if you regardless of quarterback.
Sure.
All right, let's talk next about the Dallas Cowboys, where we have Dak Prescott finishing as QB8 last week in a shootout game against the Jags. Philadelphia has one of the best defenses in the league, no doubt about that. So how confident are you in starting Prescott at home against a division rival?
I think he's a low-end QB1. I think he's a fine play. But it is a tough matchup, so not one that you'd be wishing to have in your playoffs. But I still think he's fine. I don't think... It wouldn't be a quarterback that I'd be worried about completely burning me. I mean, I think we're kind of overreacting on kind of how he's been recently. I think he's fine.
Okay. I mean, I think he does fall outside the top 10, like you say here. And the Eagles could definitely crush him.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's fair. Not a top 10 play. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Tony
Close.
Pollard is RB7 on the season through 15 weeks. No disrespect to Pollard, but this definitely speaks to how strange a year it's been for fantasy running backs.
Oh, yeah.
Ezekiel Elliott has scored 15 or more fantasy points in all of his last 7 games. Coincidentally, he has scored at least 1 rushing touchdown in all of those games. Given how this backfield is operating at such a high rate, both running backs are lineup locks in fantasy.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. It certainly didn't feel that way at the beginning of the year.
No.
But let's talk about the pass catchers now. Noah Brown scored just 2 fantasy points last time these teams faced off, although Cooper Rush was still the starter back in Week 6. Now coming off a 6-reception game in which 2 of those catches found the end zone, does Brown warrant flex consideration with Dak at quarterback?
Is Gallup active?
Only in spirit.
Okay.
Michael Gallup is... last week, wide receiver 103, and the week before that, wide receiver 64.
I wouldn't be looking to start Noah Brown. No.
You said would or wouldn't?
Would not.
That's fair.
I mean, it's been so long. It's been so long before this week that he has been relevant, and it's been with other people being injured has allowed that to happen. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so I guess, how about this? If you were picking between Gallup or Brown, who would you lean towards?
Gosh. Well, with what you just said, maybe Brown, but neither? Neither?
Okay.
How about neither?
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Dalton Schultz is still a good starting option despite an underwhelming performance last week. He has finished as tight end 4 or better in 3 of his last 6 games. I think he's still too good to leave on your bench.
What a guy. This is a
all right,
tough
decision
one.
time. Cowboys are 5-point favorites at home.
Yeah, that's surprising. That being said, they need this game more than the Eagles, and they're coming off of a close loss. And with the potential of Hurts being out. But yeah, I'm sure.
Even if Minshew plays, I'm picking the Eagles.
Yeah, well, you can't have a contingency pick, but I know what you mean. But yeah, you're getting to pick against me, differ from me, with the Eagles. Who would have thought?
Yeah, that's I like that. All right, let's move on to Saturday Night Football. And just want to quickly mention, sad news that Franco Harris passed away recently, earlier this week. He was involved in what this game has been built up to be. I believe it's I don't want to get the number wrong, but it's the anniversary of the Immaculate Reception in which Franco Harris was involved. If you've been following the NFL for any length of time, you've probably seen the clip where Franco Harris scoops up the ball. It seemingly comes up off the ground, but he makes the catch cleanly and runs it in for the end zone. So it's bittersweet that this game is being played on that anniversary, and he's just passed. So
yeah, that's true.
Just wanted to get that out there, and then let's obviously talk about Raiders at Steelers. So Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs remain lineup locks despite relatively underwhelming performances last week. I expect positive regression for both of those players. And then I'll ask you, Carson, are you buying or selling on Mac Hollins being a flex option following 4 of 8 targets for 40 yards and a touchdown?
Yeah, I wouldn't trust Mac Hollins in my fantasy playoffs. If you did last week, good job, but I wouldn't this week.
All right, so Carson's selling on that. I don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah.
I think it's boom bust. It's flexy. It's risky territory.
Yeah. Just kind of goes hand to hand.
Similarly, risky situation. Darren Waller scored his first touchdown since week 2 of the season, catching all 3 of his targets for 48 yards. Important to note that he played just 49% of the snaps. Maybe this number ramps up in his second game back from injury, but you probably at this point have found a good replacement for Waller. So
yeah, I guess if you haven't found someone reliable, I think Waller is risky, but probably a fine play. But if you have found someone else who's been consistent for the past few weeks, I would prefer them in the playoffs.
All right, fair enough. Moving on to the Steelers. Low volume passing offense and Pittsburgh go together all too well this season. Najee Harris handled 24 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown. He saw 0 targets. And then we finally got a wide receiver 1 performance out of Deontay Johnson, ironically on his lowest snap percentage of the season. So just a bit of odd news there. With George Pickens, he has appeared to just become Chase Claypool since Chase Claypool's departed. Nothing more than a deep threat that occasionally comes down with 1 or 2 long passes. I don't know. I really didn't watch much of him in college, but I feel like they're underutilizing him as a player. He seems so talented with the ball in the air, and I think he's being wasted away on this team right now. But a lot of time for that to change.
I think it
with
will.
Pat Freiermuth. Oh, sorry.
I think it has to in future seasons. But yeah, it's not looking good for the rest of this season fantasy-wise.
And then like I was saying, with Pat Freiermuth, he was not targeted in Week 15 despite playing in over 50% of the snaps. Muth has been so consistent prior to this 0-point performance with weekly finishes of tight end 9 or better over the last 3 or 4 games, weeks 11 through 14. Are you more inclined to start him or bench him this week?
I think most likely, if you've had him for that stretch of time, you don't have another tight end that's reliable, so I think I would feel pretty fine about... You don't like to see that last week, but I think you have to throw him back in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is a tough one to pick, honestly.
Yeah, 2.5 points between them. Steelers, the home team, are the favorite. Who are you going with?
I think I'll go with the Raiders. But
okay, I don't dislike that call. Coming into this game, if that touchdown hadn't been called a touchdown, the Raiders would have a worse record than Pittsburgh coming into this.
Wow.
That's kind of hard to believe.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go Pittsburgh in honor of Franco.
All right, that's fair. You need to differ on
All
your
right.
pick too.
Right. All right. Moving on to Sunday, we've got Packers at Dolphins. Aaron Rodgers has exactly one top 10 weekly finish this season. Who would have thought?
Jeez.
This is a player that we were saying is going to be a safe QB1 all season long, and he has finished inside the top 10 exactly one time.
Wow,
So we were definitely wrong on that one. Romeo Doubs returned to game action for the first time since week 9 and led all pass catchers with, get this, 10.5 fantasy points on 5 receptions. Pretty good, right? So I'll ask you, are all the Green Bay pass catchers simply boom-bust flex options at this point?
Yes. Yes.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. We haven't really seen anyone outside of the miraculous stretch of just littered with touchdowns of Christian Watson.
Yeah.
We really haven't seen any wide receiver find consistency that didn't also come along with receiving touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I think you're right on that. Let's talk about A.J. Dillon, who led the backfield on a 14-touch game, finding the end zone not once but twice on just 37% of the snaps. He did clear concussion protocol on Tuesday. And I would say this, Dillon is putting up Zeke-like numbers on less rushing volume / more receiving volume. But watching weeks 2 through 11, and that's a long stretch, where he finished outside the top 30 all but one time.
Jeez.
And his best game in that stretch was RB22 against the Jets in week 6. It's got me feeling like this recent success from Dillon shouldn't be trusted. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've picked him up recently, and I've yet to even play him, even though he's had some decent point totals on my bench in that time. But 37% of snaps, that's not a player I'm looking to start in the fantasy playoffs, and someone who's behind Aaron Jones. But yeah, you add whatever you want to add.
Well, I think just the 37% is a little bit deflated based on his injury last week, where he's been more averaging closer to 50. But
yeah,
I get where you're coming from.
Yes.
The thing is, like, I think for me, it's the earlier stretch of games.
Yeah, you
where
can't just disregard that.
Yeah, where he was just unusable. So, that I think keep him on your benches. With Aaron Jones, he still did his thing, scoring 20.6 fantasy points on 21 total touches, including a receiving touchdown. Did lose a fumble, although I think he's going to bounce back in this game.
Yeah.
And obviously it didn't hinder him too badly in the week prior.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa had his best game since their Week 11 bye, which wasn't too long ago, but still finished outside the top 12. That's not great.
No.
Is this the week he breaks back into that QB1 range in 12-team leagues?
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to Tua, but I think that you can hope that he can, and that's really all you can do. But like you said, had his best game, and the snow against the Bills really only impacted the fourth quarter, is my understanding. But the fact that he had a decent game in those conditions, still not amazing, of course, but it's in the right direction, and the Dolphins are needing to win. So I would think that top 12, he has the talent. Let's just see it happen again. So I would feel...
Yeah, I mean, there's 16 games being played, so is he going to be inside the top 12? That's the question.
Yeah.
And you're saying, let's hope.
Yeah. I think he's going to be right around that mark.
Okay. I'll give a more definitive answer. I think he does finish inside the top 12.
Okay.
Moving on, Raheem Mostert looked incredible last week, averaging 8 yards per carry on 17 rushes. This was a game where Jeff Wilson was inactive. He's been deemed day-to-day with a hip issue and was, quote, close to playing last week. This backfield is difficult to predict when both running backs are healthy, so monitor Wilson's status. If Wilson does play, are you fading Mostert?
Oh, gosh, that's so difficult. I mean, it's hard to... This is why I got rid of my shares of this backfield, but it would be hard with those numbers of 8 yards per carry on 17 rushes, and Wilson's coming back
against
from
the
injury.
Bills, by the way.
Wow. Yeah. To think that, Wilson, the player that we added halfway through the season, it's your backfield again after Mostert just did that last week.
Well, former head coach, right?
Yeah, I get it, but same for Mostert.
No, I don't disagree. I think lower expectations for Mostert if
Yeah.
Wilson's healthy. I think that's the best way to look at it.
And I would say he's a must start if Wilson's inactive.
Okay. I like the conviction.
Yeah.
Moving on, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both scored 20-plus fantasy points, due largely in part to there not being a single snowflake in sight for the first 3 quarters of last week's game. I was a little bit preoccupied with my plans of engagement that night to pay close attention to the weather. So I'm a little bitter about benching Waddle, just expecting it to be a blizzard, but that's fine. I got what I wanted.
That's true. Sorry, but it was a fluky stat line, as we have already talked about with Waddle.
That's true. But, points are points.
True.
Now coming back home to Miami, I expect both players to be borderline wide receiver ones.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's pick this game, and I'm not going to go bold here. I'm picking the Dolphins.
No, I'm with you. I think Packers are out of playoff contention. Not officially, but I think the Dolphins are still within a pretty good distance of getting that playoff berth, and I think that a win here would be really good for them. And yes, so I think they will win.
All right, cool. All right, so moving on to the Sunday afternoon game, obviously with it being kind of an inverse slate, we've got fewer games on Sunday. So Denver Broncos at LA Rams is the next matchup. Despite backup quarterback Brett Rippon committing 2 turnovers, Latavius Murray and the Denver defense picked up the slack and dominated in the backup QB Bowl. I've named it that. I haven't heard people calling that. I just decided to call it that because not only did Colt McCoy get the start, but Trace McSorley put in some good time as well for Arizona last week. So, yeah, it was an ugly one. Murray had a stat line very similar to J.K. Dobbins, albeit less efficient. 24 rushes, 130 yards, and a touchdown, 1 catch for 12 yards. With how much success Green Bay was able to have on the ground against the Rams in Week 15, does this give you confidence flexing Murray this week?
Confidence? That's not a word I would associate with any Broncos player. But, we were saying no chance of making your starting lineup before this. I think that there's an argument for flexing him with 24 carries.
Yeah, no, and the volume and obviously the touchdown upside there is good with Latavius Murray. So
yeah.
I think you can flex him this week, especially when you look back at how Green Bay was able to perform against them.
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
I think that's all good there. With Jerry Jeudy, he continues to perform well so long as Courtland Sutton remains sidelined. He has this hamstring issue that's been lingering. Monitor his status for Week 16. If Sutton does start, are you avoiding Jeudy or just lowering expectations?
Probably just lowering expectations.
Okay.
This is not a great defense that they're going up against.
Certainly. I mean, they wouldn't be 4-10 if they had a good defense, right? Denver has the same record.
Yeah, nice. I don't know. I'll go ahead and pick the Broncos right now. I don't know, obviously, what Judy's exact stat line was in Week 15, but I know how well he did in Week 14.
Yeah.
So that's enough to, fantasy playoffs, if you need that ceiling and he's become a fringe guy for you, I think that tips him over the edge.
Okay, well, this is exciting. I'm gonna pick the Rams.
That's so exciting.
They're the home team. They're the defending Super Bowl champions. I believe in them.
Eliminated from playoff contention mathematically, and that's the first time that's happened for a defending Super Bowl champ in a very long time. Is what I saw. I don't remember.
You think that's ever stopped Baker Mayfield from putting up stats before?
I think a lot of things have stopped Baker Mayfield from putting up stats before.
All right, well, let's talk about. I got 2 players I want to talk about, and these are basically start or sit.
Oh, gosh.
And the first one is Cam Akers. He saw 15 total touches, resulting in 13 fantasy points last week. 12 rushes, 65. 3 catches, 35. So flex or bench against the Denver Donkeys.
Bench. I think, like you said, the Broncos' defense is not bad, and this Rams offense is.
Yeah, but I also think that, we'll talk about it later, but James Conner had a very good game against them. And with the way that Cam Akers is getting involved, good for him. With the way that Cam Akers is getting involved in this offense, I think he is albeit a risky flex. I think you can flex him in deeper leagues. So let's move on to the tight end, which is Tyler Higbee. He caught 4 of 5 targets for 27 yards and a score to account for the Rams' only offensive touchdown. Is he a start or a sit?
I can't imagine you're going to try and argue start against me. I'm saying sit.
That one I am as well.
Okay, cool. But with how you were talking about him last week, there's just no chance that he puts up 4 catches for 27 yards, and now he's... I mean, the reason we even bring him up is just because of how good he was looking to begin the season and in previous seasons. Like, he's been a reliable tight end, but
yeah,
not right now. Not right now.
Okay, fair enough. Moving on to Sunday Night Football. It's Buccaneers at Cardinals. This game was going to be great leading up to Kyler Murray's injury. Now I think it's going to be a bit of a blowout and an opportunity for the Buccaneers to bounce back. So, Tom Brady, as we mentioned before, he experienced a career-rare second-half implosion, including 4 turnovers, and still finished as QB12. So good on you, Tom.
QB12.
Good
QB12.
matchup for a bounce-back performance, yes. The running back by committee of Fournette and White make both players touchdown dependent.
Yeah.
Arizona just allowed Latavius Murray to run for 130 yards. Are both Tampa Bay running backs flex consideration this week given the matchup?
I suppose. But I really don't.
I do declare.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a high floor and a very touchdown dependent ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
High floor
and the last
for
player I want
flex consideration. Let me just qualify that statement real quick.
Right. Last player I want to cover is Russell Gage. He surprisingly led Tampa Bay pass catchers in fantasy points, although Chris Godwin wasn't far behind. But Gage's stat line was 8 catches on 12 targets, 59 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Is this news or noise?
I think I'm leaning more towards noise. 2 touchdowns, yeah, you can have a good day. You like to see 12 targets, of course, but we haven't been seeing that from him all season. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the point that I am also agreeing with. I would call that noise as well.
Yes.
Moving on to the Cardinals on the other side, James Conner continues to perform well, scoring at least 1 touchdown in all 5 of his previous games. Lower expectations against Tampa Bay. They held Mixon and Pirine to a combined total of 78 scrimmage yards and 0 touchdowns.
Wowza.
So his stretch of good games might be coming to an end here. And then the QB carousel since Kyler Murray's injury has been difficult to watch. McCoy and McSorley combined last week for the stat line. 20 completions on 36 attempts for 173 yards and 3 interceptions with 0 touchdowns.
Ouch.
It's bad.
Yeah.
Despite this, DeAndre Hopkins continues to get wide receiver 1 volume, although his touchdown upside has taken a hit with the backup QBs in play.
Yeah.
Marquise Brown has been relatively awful since returning from injury, with weekly finishes of wide receiver 43, 56, and 63. I would call him a boom-bust flex consideration, although he does have 3 consecutive games with 8 targets. So where are your thoughts on him?
He's definitely a difficult player to bench in the fantasy playoffs just because of how he started the season. But yeah, I mean, with the backup QBs... Yeah, but that
was without DeAndre.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And with the backup QBs, he is fringe. I think just the value of his name might sway you to start him over some of these other players, like another Marquise, like Marquise Goodwin. I don't know. Maybe Marquise Brown would sway you, but I don't know if that's actually right. It might just be the name talking to you.
Yeah, I mean, would you rather start, although this is probably, I guess this could exist, Amari Cooper or Marquise Brown?
Gosh. Gosh. That's a tough one. Probably Marquise Brown. I don't know exactly what Cooper's targets have been like, but I like the 3 games with 8 targets. That's still solid volume, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wide receiver,
like
43 or worse, so those targets aren't doing all that much for him. Yeah. Let's move on to Monday Night Football.
Both picking the Buccaneers.
Obviously,
I think we said that, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Last game of the slate, it's Chargers at Colts, another primetime game for Indianapolis. Woohoo.
Yippee.
Justin Herbert disappointed in a major way last week, finishing as QB 25, following 4 consecutive finishes inside the top 10. So that's rough.
Yeah.
If you survived last week, obviously better days are ahead. As we just mentioned, he had a whole month worth of games where he was inside the top 10. 0 passing touchdowns limited all pass catchers for the Chargers, but Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are still lineup locks moving forward. Kind of banking on Justin Herbert bouncing back in this one, understandably so. And although you wouldn't know this from watching last week's historic second half collapse by the Colts, they have been a tough matchup for wide receivers.
Yeah.
So lower expectations in general. But these pass catchers should still do slightly better than they did last week.
Yeah, that's fair. I wouldn't be looking and rushing to start Gerald Everett, for example, but Williams, Allen, Eckler, of course, Herbert, they're all good plays.
Yeah.
And Nick Foles, Nick Foles, the starter for the Colts. That's what I read.
Yeah, that is true. I hadn't written that in yet, but that is the case. So, I mean,
I don't think
the biggest takeaway
anything for their value.
No, the biggest takeaway from that is that your boy Michael Pittman is still a lock-in starter. And then speaking of running backs, Jonathan Taylor placed on IR. It's been a severely disappointing season for the pick 1.1 on most fantasy boards.
Everyone, he's the safer 101 pick over McCaffrey. Well, look how that turned out.
Yeah, that's very mean-spirited of you, but you're not wrong.
Mean-spirited? That's just what everyone was saying. And you were like, you got McCaffrey. I'm sure you're happy that you were the second pick in like 2 of your leagues for that reason, and you didn't have to make the decision. Yeah. You were kind of upset, and it worked out. That's what I mean. My whole point, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the future, but like my whole point is there's not really... It doesn't. There's no such thing in this sport, but especially if running backs, of a safer option as far as injury concerns. Really, there really isn't.
Yeah. It speaks to the bigger issue of there are no guarantees.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. In the fallout of this news, Deion Jackson becomes the preferred PPR option of this backfield. It is important to note that Zach Moss handled over 20 carries following Taylor's departure last week. Wow. So with how the Chargers are pretty much incapable of stopping running backs, does this move Zach Moss into flex consideration for this week?
Oof, I mean, it's hard to say no if the carry totals, but I want to say no. How about that?
Ooh, okay. I don't think it's all that bold. I think this is going to be a game where they have to throw, and I would feel more comfortable if I had to start one being Deion Jackson.
Yeah,
but
if you're banking on Zach Moss as like a handcuff
Monday
in the
Night
fantasy
Miracle
playoffs, yeah, and like it's not even. It'd be one thing if Deion Jackson wasn't there, but since he's going to be taking away all the receptions, like I don't want to throw in Zach Moss. I mean, those carries are great, but if it amounts to even just 90 yards and he does nothing else, it's not winning you anything.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Just for context, what he did last week was 24 rushes for 81 yards, 1 target, 0 catches, so that got you 8.1. That was a very Nick Chubb type stat line. As of late.
Nick Chubb floor stat line.
Right. Lastly, I'll take the L on this prediction. Alec Pierce finished with 0 fantasy points despite being targeted 4 times. I said he was a long shot. And sometimes those long shots miss more often than not. So
it was surprising how that game panned out, anyways. So I don't think it was an unfair prediction.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah, for sure. I'll take the Chargers.
Yeah, I was hoping you would choose differently, but I'm going with the Chargers with you. And that wraps it up. So, anything you want to say before I wrap up here?
No, just enjoy your holidays, everyone. And all the football being on Saturday. Remember that. Set your lineup. Don't forget.
Yep.
And that's all I got.
Okay. Well, thank you all for watching and or listening. And we will see you next week.
Peace out, everybody.